Thanks, Vicky. How good is this? And what I mean, how good is this? How good to be back face to face. I think we've all got used to working virtually over the last couple of years, and virtual ways of working definitely have their place. But in my opinion, these sort of events, they need to be face to face. It's great to see you all. And what am I going to talk about over the next 25 minutes or so? Well, I bumped into the godfather of the buy-to-let market over breakfast this morning, David Whittaker. And the first thing David said to me was, "I'm looking forward to your rousing opening address." So that got me a little bit on edge, for sure, given it's the first time I've stood up and spoken in 2.5 years. Done lots of virtual stuff, and it's been quite easy, but it is a little more nerve-wracking when you stood up on the stage, I must be honest, so please bear with me. I also asked one of our senior economists in the bank what he thought about the prospects for the buy-to-let market and the wider economy over the next 2 years. And he said, I've got absolutely no idea. So that's kind of given me even more confidence to stand up and talk about the next 12, 18 months. Joking aside, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to look at a brief overview of the buy-to-let market itself. So that's the lending market, which is very different to the private rented sector. Obviously, the two cross over. I'm going to look at how landlords are doing. So we've got some recent insight as to how landlords are feeling themselves and what they think about their prospects for the coming 12, 18 months. Lots of talk about the green agenda. And it's a bit of a cliche, but it covers a whole host of things. And I'm only going to focus on specifics to buy-to-let and just highlight a few challenges on the horizon. I'm sure you want to hear what lenders have been up to. You know, we've all got our challenges. You, the intermediary, us, the lender. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then most importantly, probably why you're all here, what's in it for you. But before I do that, I thought it was worth spending a minute or two just reflecting on the last 2 years. Now, I'm not going to talk about COVID-19 because I'm sure we're all completely sick to the back teeth of COVID. But ironically, events over the last couple of months have kind of meant that COVID's gone into the background a little bit, which I guess is really good news. But if you're like me, the last 2 years has been, quite life-changing. Hopefully, none of you have had really bad experiences with COVID. Personally, I had a very bad experience with COVID, and it's definitely changed my way of thinking about life in general and the working life, and helped me get my work-life balance back in check. It's also got me thinking a little bit about the world has really gone completely mad. So if you're like me, I never thought I'd hear the President of the United States of America talking about injecting yourself with bleach as a potential cure for COVID. And we've obviously got our own problems a little bit closer to home. And love him or hate him, I'd love to see how Boris worms and sort of deviously makes his way out of this particular issue that he's in. But I'm sure he will. He seems to be that sort of character. But, more somberly, events in the last couple of months, I never thought I'd see a war in Europe in my lifetime. And it does get you thinking about life in general. And I guess selfishly, you're starting to think about the economy. You're starting to think about the effect on the buy-to-let market, the mortgage market in general. But it's a horrible thing. And it's that's going to lead to some uncertainty in the economic world for sure over the next 12, 18 months. And it may take longer than that to recover from the events in Ukraine. And ironically, Brexit. I mean, how often do we hear about Brexit now? But I guess when you're thinking economically, there's still some underlying problems to feed their way into the economy through the Brexit scenario. But it's disappeared off the radar. So I guess what the pandemic's done is it's kind of brought things into perspective, but it's led to a load of economic uncertainty across the globe. That said, let's get on to things a little bit closer to home. So the buy-to-let market, which is why we're all here, I guess. This is a chart I've used loads of times, and I make no apologies for it. The reason I'm using it again is it tells a brilliant story of just how resilient the buy-to-let market has been through the last 15 years or so. So if we look back to 2007, buy-to-let market's doing really well. 45 billion of gross lending. Everything's rosy in the garden. And then we enter the so-called credit crunch, the run on Northern Rock. You see Lehman Brothers going bust, and a whole host of major banks, HBOS included, nearly hitting the skids. We see 5 quarters of recession, and buy-to-let lending fall off a cliff to just 8.5 billion from its peak of 45. But more importantly, what you see is a slow, steady, and sustainable recovery to a market of around 40 billion in 2016. And the whole point of talking about this is in 2016, we see the Chancellor, then George Osborne's onslaught on the buy-to-let market with a whole host of challenges coming. Stamp duty, you see the PRA's supervisory statement on underwriting standards, you see the tax changes, and certainly 4 or 5 years of more uncertainty. But the key here is the buy-to-let market took a slight dip, but it didn't fall off a cliff. So it's very resilient, and so are landlords. And then if you were like me, sitting there in March 2020 going into lockdown, I really thought I could bring my retirement plans forward because I couldn't see how the market could function. Valuers couldn't value. I nearly said solicitors couldn't solicit, but that's probably a different thing altogether, so we won't go there. We had to relocate all of our processing teams from home, give them laptops, and the market shut down for weeks, and I thought it was the end of the world. What happened? Just goes to show what I know, the opposite. Buy-to-let lending goes through the roof and hits a peak of 45 billion. So it's back to where it was in 2007. So it's a really resilient market, and it's an important part of the overall UK mortgage market. So, private rented sector, distinct from the buy-to-let lending market. How important is it to the overall UK housing agenda? The answer is really important. It provides a home to around 4.5 million families. It's around 19% of households in the UK, so it's incredibly important to have a well-functioning private rented sector. Crazy. 3 in 10 babies born in the UK are born into rented accommodation, and some of them will never know anything else. A challenge that I want to come back to as part of the green agenda, but 2.5 million private rented homes don't meet the minimum proposed EPC standards. Hold that thought. And in one of our recent surveys, the regulatory burden on landlords is the biggest cited reason for landlords looking to exit the sector. My worry here is, of course we want to lose those bad landlords. We don't want to lose the good ones. We need a well-functioning private rented sector. And you, the intermediary, this isn't a criticism at all. I really feel for you sometimes. You must be struggling to keep pace with the sheer volume of change in the buy-to-let market and the private renter sector. There is so much going on for you as a mortgage professional to keep pace with. And worryingly, 23% of housing is estimated to be below standard in the PRS. What I mean by that? Recently formed Department of Levelling Up for Housing and Communities actually goes one stage further. It talks about non-decent housing in the private rented sector. Now that's got to be a worry if we've got people living in non-decent housing. DLUC has this mantra that it wants to reduce the amount of non-decent housing by half. Yet to be seen how they intend to do that. Lots of talk, lots of proposals. My biggest worry is that it puts another burden on landlords, another financial burden potentially. As long as it's on the right kind of landlords, that's okay. So we've got to keep a very close eye on what that does. And we hear that landlords will be excluded from the cladding redress where they've got more than one property. You know, some different opinions on that. They're running a business, maybe they shouldn't be included, but again, it's another financial burden potentially on landlords. And as part of one of 12 missions from the department, renters will have a secure path to home ownership. And again, quite rightly, you know, that should be the case. But again, it's how that's done and the burden that that potentially puts on landlords. So we've got to keep a very close eye on all of these things. And lots of talk about the proposal to scrap no-fault evictions. And that's a good thing in a way. It could be a bad thing because it could mean that landlords can't get the right kind of tenant out of their property easily. And there are genuine reasons where they need to evict tenants. So lots of changes, lots of travel in the private rented sector. And how are landlords themselves feeling? Well, National Landlord Register looks like it's coming. It's at proposal stage. From a Lloyds Banking Group perspective, we're very supportive of a National Landlord Register. We've also got to have one eye on the fact that the devolved governments have their own forms of this. In Wales, it works particularly well. In Scotland and Northern Ireland, not so well. We're calling for simplification. So whenever we've seen legislation in the past, you get this so-called layering of legislation. It's really important that we don't just keep layering legislation on top of legislation because it becomes incredibly complicated. And that's where the private rented sector currently sits. So we met with DLUC a few weeks ago, and we were talking really sternly with them and talking about we need simplification as part of new legislation. It's really important. If you're a landlord, it's probably a good place to be at the moment, actually, joking aside. Tenant demand is up 32% year on year, but the availability of properties to rent is down 51%. Rents have risen faster than ever. Good if you're a landlord, not necessarily so good if you're a tenant. And rental voids have hit a 5-year low. So that has to be good news from a landlord's perspective. They've had their challenges. 23% have had a loss financially during COVID, and 36% of those who've had a loss plan to sell at least one of their properties from their portfolios. And again, it's back to my point that we want the right kind of landlords exiting the sector. We don't want the good landlords leaving the sector. But overall, landlords are predominantly sticking. The latest round of research tells us that for the first time in a long time, the amount of landlords planning to sell and planning to buy is equal. So it's fairly consistent. And the basic laws of demand and supply are at play. I mean, house price inflation doesn't take a genius to work out over the last 10 years. If you'd bought a property 10 years ago, you'd have done very nicely out of it. It's a good long-term investment still for the right kind of landlords, and also if they can find a property to buy. We're all seeing some supply issues at play. So that's landlords. And on to the green agenda. Much talked about. Just a quick, out of interest, show of hands. Who knows when the proposed deadline for EPC changes in the buy-to-let market is? Give us a quick show of hands. So we're probably about 10%? Yeah, okay. So by April 2025, all new tenancies need to be rated A to C in terms of their EPC rating. And by April 2028, all tenancies. How have we done? We've made a good start, actually. So the proportion of A to C rated properties in the last 10 years has gone from 2 in 10 to around 4 in 10. So we've done 40% of private rented properties in 10 years. I'm not a mathematician, but how the hell are we going to get through 60% in 3 years? This is a big, big challenge for landlords. And I think it's important that when you're talking to landlord clients, you make them aware of these upcoming changes. Really, really important that we get this sorted out. Even bigger challenge when you consider that a large percentage of private rented accommodation is pre-war terrace property. And I'm not sure if any of you have tried to get a tradesman to do any work on your houses recently. They're like rocking horse stuff. And even when you can get one, you're paying through the nose for it, and quite rightly, they're in demand. And what we're seeing is a shift to new build. So landlords are buying new build properties with the right kind of EPC rating and the right kind of efficiency. And in fact, 50% is the share of homes bought by investors with an EPC rated A to C, the highest figure on record, up from 39% a year ago and 33% the year before. Interestingly, in a recent YouGov survey, those people surveyed, 50% of them said that we should ban investors from buying new build properties. Now you can spin that either way. You can say they're buying property at the expense of the first-time buyer, if the first-time buyer can afford to buy one. but why shouldn't an investor buy a decent home for somebody to live in and do a good job with their rental portfolio? That's an argument for another day, definitely. So that's the green agenda. So what are we up to? Apart from upsetting you all, I'm sure, with things like product withdrawals, but we'll come back to that in a second. Now, I wrote these slides 2 weeks ago and then went off on holiday. I looked at them this morning and thought, strong overall buy-to-let product choice approaching record levels. Now, that might have been right a couple of weeks ago or even a month ago, but we all know what's happening recently. We're seeing less buy-to-let products on the market. We're seeing lenders withdraw at short notice. I'll come back to that. We are seeing holiday let availability triple since 2020. Now, if you're like me, I loved my foreign holidays, and these are words that I never thought I'd say. I actually went to Center Parcs last week, and I loved it. And I've got a house booked in Cornwall in the summer. All stuff that I never would have said pre-pandemic. And I guess the love affair with foreign holidays is coming back, but I still think we'll see a large proportion of people choose to holiday somewhat in the UK. So certainly the holiday let market looks like a very lucrative area for landlords to be in. And definitely still seeing that search for greater yields from HMO properties. Brilliant news that we've got specialist lenders amongst us today, and it's great that the specialist sector is providing choice and solutions for all kinds of landlords. And if you like BM Solutions, you know, we've made our stance for years to say we're a traditional buy-to-let lender, so rental assessed. We do a few little quirky things now, but we're not that adventurous, but we play in that traditional sector. And competition in that space is really strong as well. So from a lender's perspective, we've all still got appetite to lend. It's just become very difficult to process because of capacity. We've seen unprecedented volumes over the last couple of years. And I don't mind sharing with you, in 2020, that year I thought the light switch was going to go off, BM Solutions had its biggest year since 2007. And it had its biggest ever year in product transfers. And that was in a year when I thought we were doomed. So capacity is a big problem for lenders. You know, we've still got our staff working from home. They're still working with laptops. It's not ideal, but we're proud of what we're trying to do to support the mortgage market. The remortgage market is obviously buoyant. I touched earlier on about those changes 5 years ago, the PRA changes on underwriting standards. That saw a massive uptick in 5-year mortgages. And all of those 5-year mortgages have come to maturity in the first 4 months of this year. And green mortgage availability. So lenders are working on solutions to support the green agenda, and more of that's happening. Now, all of that said, we've seen our first base rate rise since 2009. And that's come with its challenge. Now, without going into any detail, I'm not an economist, but swap rates have been going up on a daily basis. And I've had loads of challenges about the fact lenders are profiteering, you know, in terms of making product withdrawals quickly and putting rates up. This has been a huge challenge for us. Swap rates are moving at an unprecedented level. And we've done our best to try and maintain product ranges where we can. And I know it's tough for you guys out there. I just ask you to bear with us. You know, it's a factor of the economy and the way rates are rising. And thank you for your patience. And 5-year fixed rate is now dominating. And just pause for a second, and I guess the answer will be very similar to the EPC question, but just a quick show of hands as to how many of you are talking to your landlords about taking a 5-year fixed rate that takes them past the EPC deadline. Yeah, so a few more. And again, it's important to highlight, it's a good conversation starter, isn't it? You know, taking a 5-year fixed rate, you're locking yourself in. You do realize there's going to be a change of legislation potentially in 2025. Just one to think about. So what about you? This is what I see. 80% of all mortgage business is intermediated. And in the buy-to-let space, it's more than 90%. So how important are you? Incredibly important. You know, landlords need your advice more than ever. This is an incredibly complex market. I've talked about this already, but we need a really strong and sustainable and healthy private rented sector. The whole point of that statement is I personally think, and you can see it from that first slide through the last 15 years, buy-to-let is here to stay. So we'll always have a buy-to-let market. It's weathered the storm many, many times. It is definitely here to stay. Okay, we've got some challenges on the horizon, but we need a strong PRS. And 60% of the private rented sector is mortgage funded. So that's why landlords need you to help them buy and remortgage buy-to-let properties. Change is constant and tough to keep up with. So BM Solutions as a business, we've done our best to come out and do some virtual stuff over the last 2 years. We've got a BM Bite Size, which I don't know whether any of you have attended. It talks about the changes, and we'll be doing more of that, and other lenders are doing the same thing. So if you get a chance to register for these things, it's worth a half an hour of your time, because it will just highlight those challenges on the horizon and help you become more informed when you're talking to your landlord clients. And yet, rate pulls are constant, and it's a big challenge. I can just ask you to bear with us. And our lender contact strategy has been forced to change. So our BDMs have predominantly been at home for 2 years. They're not always going to be at home. We've let them back out. But we'll see a more hybrid way of working. So I'm sure many of you are happy to deal with a BDM on Teams, or to email them, or to contact them by telephone. But equally, if you need to see a BDM, they'll come and see you. But it's more of a hybrid way of working, and I think it's a better way of working because our team are handling more queries from you faster than ever. And definitely education will be key for all of us. We've all got to keep pace with these changes. So how do I summarize the whistle-stop tour of the last 20 minutes or so? There's definitely uncertainty ahead. Back to that first slide, our economists are forecasting a dip in buy-to-let lending over the next three years. Every time I've shown that slide, there's always been a dip on it. Economists are doom and gloom. Most of the time, it's gone north. But there's uncertainty ahead, and for the reasons I talked about. Definitely some headwinds, without a doubt. And how would I summarize my feelings? Well, I'm incredibly cautiously optimistic about the future. Thank you for listening.